Good evening, everyone. Welcome to my weekly live stream of Node-RED development. I'm going to spend the next hour or so doing some issue fixing on Node-RED and sharing the process I go through doing it. I'm not at all set up yet. In fact, I can see I've still got last week's caption down there. So I'm going to just, whilst I talk and try and pay attention to what I'm talking to you about, I'm also going to just get all my screens set up. So I can share my screen and not my work email and all the other stuff that I don't want to share on the internet on my screen. So what are we doing this week? There's an issue was raised. I can't remember its number. But it's to do with the keyboard handling in the editor. So it's an issue where there are some shortcuts that the user can, the editor lets you customize the shortcuts across all of the actions in the editor. And the editor remembers your customizations. Trouble is, there's a problem with some shortcuts that if the user unsets them, so sets them to undefined or changes them, for some shortcuts it fails to remember them. And for example, the shortcut that Node-RED dashboard adds in, it always gets reset back to its default. So we're going to figure out what's going on and get the settings to remember them. So just still sorting out my screens whilst I try and talk and be interesting. Do say hi in the chat if you're on the stream. If you're watching on the YouTube archive, drop in a comment. Do subscribe. I do this every week, 8 p.m. GMT, UK time. Aim to spend about an hour or so. It normally runs over a little, but normally my desire for a cup of tea outweighs the fun I'm having fixing up issues. So let's fix keyboard shortcuts in the editor. So with a bit of magic, I'm going to hit OK, and then this bit of text you can see down there, which currently says improve invalid flow error handling. I hit OK, and just like that, it changes. Fix keyboard shortcuts in the editor. It's those little touches that I normally try and get done before I start streaming. But kids' bedtime overran slightly, and I was still reading stories to my daughter about 5 minutes ago. So, but at least this week I know exactly what I am doing. Whilst we're doing it, I'm also just running little tasks in the background. There's a big migration of the Flow library happening over the next couple of weeks, bit by bit. If you've seen some of my tweets, I'm sort of also mid one of those big migrations, so I've got another script running in a window over here that I'm keeping an eye on, and I'm sort of running blocks at a time, 200 nodes at a time. Oh, and I think I've just finished. Let me just double check that. Awesome. So that's a big bit of the Flow library just finished migrating, which is going to make life so much easier. Right, I'm talking about lots of different things. Let's knuckle down and look at the issue. So to do that, what have we got? Let me just make sure here's the problem. I've got entirely the wrong window open, and a window full of all my work email that there's nothing interesting there. So let's just move that off screen. Then you're going to see that screen. You're going to see that screen, which I can close. Oh, like I said, a little behind getting set up. Hi to the guys in the chat. Great to see you here. Like I said, hope this is going to be an interesting one once I get my head in gear and we get going. So there we go. Hopefully you can see stuff. Right, let's go load up the issue list. Now, I did get asked, how do I pick topics for the live stream? Normally, I kind of hope that an issue will crop up during the week that I mentally bookmark as something that is going to be straightforward-ish to fix, and something I can get done in the hour end to end. So, and this was very much one of them. So, as I described, this user is unassigning keyboard shortcut fields. I don't know why they want to remove the keyboard shortcuts, but fair enough, that's what they want to do. And when they reload, they come back again. Now, and they say, please see the screenshot, but that I think comes from they originally reported in the forum where they did provide a screenshot, and they haven't here. And note, it's only certain keyboard shortcuts are getting reset. Okay, so we're going to use show dashboard as the example. Right, let's too many windows. Where is somewhere? I must have Node-RED running. How can I get to this point of a day and I not have? No, I don't have Node-RED running. It's because I've been doing the flow library stuff all day. So that's the story for another day. So here we are in the code. Again, for the regulars who are familiar with this, for those who are new here, this is the code checked out of Git. We use grunt as our test runner and normally just run grunt dev and let that run in the background. So that builds the code, runs it, and then watches for any changes I make to any files and automatically rebuilds and does the right stuff. Always takes slightly longer that first time because we minify the code as well that first time. But okay, so here we have Node-RED running, and here we get the editor up. All good so far. Now, keyboard shortcuts are, is it shift ? Is the shortcut to bring up the user settings dialog, keyboard. So here are all of the actions registered in the editor. And then their default and their shortcut and the scope, which is to do with which bit of the editor should be in focus to handle that keyboard shortcut. And if you scroll down the list, you can just see this one here. It's got the little user icon. So that's telling me that this one has got a custom shortcut set on that's not part of the default keymap. Now, the one we are interested in is show dashboard. So you can see show dashboard set to Command-Shift-D. Which, sure enough, if I do Command-Shift and D, it opens up the dashboard. And I've not got dashboard set up, so you just get the default screen. So that's the keyboard shortcut. If we pull up the keyboard shortcut and I filter it, so show dashboard, if I click on it, then I can put in a new keyboard shortcut. Now, so first quick test, the issue talks about setting it to unassigned. Before we go looking at setting it to unassigned, which is kind of an edge case anyway, which I'm just going to experiment, or not Control-Shift-Q, I think that'll kill Chrome. Don't want to do that. Let's do Control-Shift-A. I think that's going to be relatively benign. So having set that, you can now see in the list it's got the user icon next to it. We close Command-Shift-A, and sure enough it brings up the dashboard. Okay. Now, what Node-RED does under the covers is it stores that in your user settings file. And this is one of the things that changed in 1.2. It used to be we would have a file called .config.json in the Node-RED user directory. And that contained all sorts of different things. We've split that up into 4 files. So we've now got .config.users.json, which basically has the individual user customizations of the editor. And because I've not got admin auth set up, then it uses underscore as sort of the default user. So these are the default editor settings, and you can see there's a keymap section, and down here you can see dashboard, show dashboard. Can you see? Let me know if I need to zoom some more. Oh, come on, shrink window. There we are. Yeah, here you can see the dashboard, show dashboard, action, global scope. So this will apply where whatever's got focus in the editor. Control-Shift-A, and it's user-defined true. I think user true is kind of a bit defunct writing that into this file because it's in this file, therefore it is a user-defined one. But that's an important point. I mean, that's how the editor knows it's a user-defined one rather than a default one. So we've stored the value correctly. And now if we reload the editor, I can't remember if I had or not, and go pull up the shortcut keys again, and go down, and show dashboard has reverted back to Command-Shift-D. And just have a look back in this file. Well, it's still in the file as Control-Shift-A. I say Command because I'm on a Mac here, but to make life easy, relatively, we treat Command and Control as interchangeable in the editor. We don't try and distinguish the different those two as separate meta keys. It just makes some of the cross-platform stuff and keyboard handling just easier, just to cheat. Now, I will admit I did that long before I used a Mac, and it seemed sensible. Now that I've been using a Mac for a few years, it kind of still just works for me. So anyway, but here we see the bug, or at least an instance of the bug. I customized this shortcut. It's not to do with setting it to unassigned. I've set this shortcut and it's changed. So what's going on? To figure that out, we need to go dive into the code, and that's all flow library code, which we don't need now. What we want is this window. Get rid of the flow library window. And close all that because we don't care about that. What we care about is how does the keyboard handling work in the editor. Or at least, we're not going to get into how the keyboard handling works, we're going to get into how the shortcut's registered. So in the source tree, packages, node modules, @node-red, editor client, source, JavaScript. Then in here, in UI, we have the keyboard. We have the keyboard.js. So this is where we do all the custom keyboard handling. So what are we looking for? Well, this is way too small. Let's make it nice and big. Is that big? There we are. It should be a bit more readable. Now, as I say each week, I've sort of picked this issue as one that my gut instinct is it's not going to be nice and containable within the hour. Sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes we end up down a rabbit hole and we do what we can. And this one, I've got a vague sense, but it's been a long time since I've looked at the keyboard code. So frankly, all bets are off. Let's see where we end up. So this is the init function. So this will get called very early on in the editor lifecycle before we've loaded any nodes into the palette. And that's an important point because we're looking at the dashboard node. Maybe before we get into the lifecycle of the keyboard stuff, let's look at it almost from the outside in. What's the dashboard doing to register its node? Now, for some reason I have not got dashboard in this project. So let's go and find Node-RED dashboard. It's funny, I've moved over to this new laptop over the last couple of months, having, sort of finally moved off the laptop I've used for years and years and years. And every now and then I'll just stumble over something not set up just because I've not had to touch it in this way for so long. So here we are. So Node-RED dashboard, somewhere in here, and that's the next challenge because I don't do much with editing dashboard code, but I reckon it's in UI base. So in here, I'm betting there's a call to red.keyboard. Here it is. And in fact, it's got a bit of legacy code here as well. It has a line to it's got this line which just registers a keyboard if the actions system of the editor doesn't exist. So that's for old versions of Node-RED. We're not going to worry about that. What we've got down here, and I can actually see from a cleanliness point of view, these two lines should be the other way round. But yeah, what it should be doing, although I don't think this is going to cause the bug. So in Node-RED, we have this concept of actions. So actions are things you can do. And if you hit Control-Shift-P, you bring up the action list. And in fact, it's exactly the same list as all the keyboard shortcuts. These are all sort of named actions that can be triggered, whether it's by keyboard shortcut or through code. So what things can do is they first register an action by name. So here it's registering the dashboard : show dashboard action, and you provide a function that should be called when that action is triggered. So in this instance, it does a window.open and opens up the dashboard in a new window or tab, whatever the browser does. And then once you've registered the action, you can call red.keyboard.add and then register a shortcut for that named action. So here you see dashboard, show dashboard, that's the name of the action. So that's why I say sort of semantically those should probably be the other way around, because you kind of want to register the action before you register a keyboard shortcut for it. In reality, I don't think it matters. Well, unless that ends up being the bug, I don't think it matters them being that way round. So from a Node point of view, all it's doing is setting this keyboard shortcut. Now, and then that's why it's getting reset back to Control-Shift-D when I reloaded the editor, because this node's being loaded and it's calling that line and it's explicitly setting the keyboard shortcut back to Control-Shift-D. What Node-RED should be doing is it should honor the fact that the user has set some customization on that action, and that a line like this should not override a user's preference. So we need to be able to distinguish between something registering essentially the default shortcut versus a customization a user has made. Because, the right fix is not to require dashboard and any other node that registers its own actions and keyboards. We don't want them to have to change what they're doing. We should be able to handle this all in the editor ourselves. Right, so back into red.keyboard inside the editor. So here's where we initialize. And that's why I took that detour just then. This is being initialized before we've loaded any nodes. So all of this code will happen before the dashboard gets added to the palette. I say that slightly advisedly. There is a race condition here, as in you can't strictly say all of this happens before. That is because first thing this does is it goes and gets the key map. So this is the user's so this is the default key map for the editor, which is in keymap.json. So these are all of the core actions in Node-RED and their default keyboard shortcuts. So it goes and gets the default key map. It then iterates over those and registers them as handlers. So that all works, and stores them as here are the defaults. It then loops over the user key map. So this is any customizations the user has, which is loaded from user settings. And it then calls add handler again to override it. Now, if you compare these two calls to add handler, and we'll go look at add handler because that's where the action is going to be. Here you can see add handler, the last 4th argument is false for the default key map. And down here, when we call it again, we're calling it with true for the user key map. And that, I suspect, is going to be an important difference between the two. So let's go and have a look at add handler, which is right around here. Okay, so add handler. Now that's slightly strange. Why would... Okay, so the 4th argument is called on down. This, okay, so there's a bit of a code smell here in that this function signature has existed for a very long time, and how it's used has slightly evolved. And I think this 4th argument used to be whether do we handle the event when the key is pressed or when the key is released, and that was something that is important elsewhere. But I think in this particular scenario, there's that on down flag you can see here. If it's a Boolean, and we've got our way through all these if statements, and I'm hoping I don't have to try and parse and try and figure out what we're trying to do here. No, actually, no, we're good. We're good. So let's look at what these arguments actually are. That's what we should do. So when we're registering the key map, the first one is the scope. So what needs to be focused. The key, which is what's the difference between key and key? Let's go bring up Keymap.json. Right. So the structure is the first level is the scope, the next level is the shortcut key description, and then that points to the actual action. So key is the keyboard shortcut, and then keys, and then that is the name of the action we want to invoke. And it's false because it's not a user one, and then down here it's true because it is a user one. Oh man, right. Like I said, this is quite old code that has been, well, it's in need of documentation for a start. So we have scope, key, modifiers, whereas in fact that it used to be we could only support things like, Control C. One of the changes that went in ages ago was the ability to handle more complex sequences. So in fact, you can see here we support composed sequences of keys. So Control G space X, or Control G space D. So we actually support sequences of keys. So that's quite handy. So all the core sidebar tabs, you can do Control G, let go, and and then I for info, H for help, D for debug, C for config, X for context. Okay, so we come down into here, and we are calling this with on down set to true. So we action to key map is kind of almost a reverse lookup. So given an action, what's the current key map for it? And we do flag whether it's a user provided one or not. And then it does a whole bunch of work to do with how we actually handle the key, which is irrelevant at this point. Now, what we're going to just do to maybe illuminate this a bit more, we are going to just put an if statement saying if this is for the dashboard, and again, the argument's called modifiers. I kind of need to, maybe that's what we'll do, depending on how the time goes. We'll tidy that up to actually make it, we'll rename the variables to actually make it a bit more meaningful. Let me just go and find exactly what its action's called. Dashboard : show dashboard. So I think I'm testing the right thing. So if we're setting a handler for dashboard show dashboard, then we're going to console.log scope key modifiers and on down. In fact, we're going to console.warn that for a reason I'll show you in a sec. So I've saved that, and then like I mentioned in one of my tabs, grunt's kicked in, it's rebuilt the editor, so I can just refresh. Oh, and I should have the console open at the same time. So here you can see two calls. Can you see? Let's make that plenty big. Control-Shift-A, dashboard show dashboard. So if you remember, Control-Shift-A was the one I had set, and the last argument is set to true. So this is the one being set by the user map, by the user customization. And I did no.warn because it would give us a stack trace, although, yeah, it's not so useful. Yeah, definitely not so useful. Either way, you can see it's been called a second time with Control-Shift-D, dashboard show dashboard, and undefined because Node-RED dashboard is only Node-RED dashboard is calling actions.add, which is keyboard.add, and it's only calling it with the 3 arguments. But that's good because that gives us a way to distinguish between dashboard providing a default value versus the user provided one. What does all of this mean? What does all of this mean? Right. When we look back up at, where is it, in the init function, where we build up this default key map. Why do we have a default key map? Let me just go. Here's why. If I go back to the editor, pull it up, and let's say, let's pick one of these. Actually, can I do this in a useful way so you're not squinting quite so much without making the screen too big? Let's say, copy selection to internal clipboard, Control C. We all know that one. Let's change that to Control J. Okay, so that's now user assigned. If I click on it to edit and I use this button down here rather than the tick above, that reverts it back to whatever its default value was. So, for example, this convert subflow, which is unassigned, if I do Shift P, which would be very annoying, but there we have it, Shift P, and if I revert, it reverts back to unassigned. If I go down to show dashboard, if I set that again to Control-Shift-A, and then if I hit revert, it goes back to unassigned. Now, isn't that curious? It goes back to unassigned rather than going back to what dashboard has said. That's because it's using this function revert to default when it wants to revert in the action. And what this does is it removes the existing handler, and then it looks up in default keymap to find what was the default, and it adds it back in with false, saying, this is not a user specified one. Now, what we want to be doing is if someone calls add handler and it's for an action, just think this through. Let me just think this through for a moment before I commit myself down this route. Yeah, I think this is going to work. So let's just copy this code for setting up a default. So down here in add handler, if we're about to set something up, if you say if on down, or if not on down, so this is not a user provided shortcut, and default keymap and not default keymap has own property the name of the action, and the name of the action for curious reasons I think is cb down, because man, I really need to tidy up these variable names. But so what we're saying at this point is someone's called add handler with an action, and it's not one that we know a default value for. We can use what they've set as the default. And let's just make sure we've got these values as we expect. So scope is set, key will be set, yep, and user is false. So, okay. So now if someone calls add keyboard.add, provides a shortcut, as long as they don't set that final argument to true, and we come in here and we say, oh, we don't know about that. We've never had a keyboard action for that shortcut, and it's not the user doing it via this dialog, then we'll set that as the default. So to see that in action, we'll just reload to load that change, bring up this, go down to show dashboard, change it back to Control-Shift-A. Okay, so that's been done. Now if I hit the revert button, it's reverted back to Command-Shift-D instead of unassigned. So that's fixed that path. And if we set that to Command-Shift-A and hit close, and just to be certain of it, let's reopen the editor file, the config, user config. So dashboard, show dashboard, Control-Shift-A. Definitely got that updated. We reload and bring up the keyboard shortcut dialog. Show dashboard, it's still Command-Shift-D. That's okay, we expected that because we haven't fixed that yet, but we've fixed part of it. In fact, we've fixed something that wasn't even the original issue. We've fixed reverting these extra ones to knowing what their default is. Now, we need a bit more logic here. What we need to do is say, basically we don't want, if, right, let me just think this through. Action to keymap. The logic I think we want is if we're being provided a non-user keyboard shortcut and there is already a user one set, then we shouldn't override the user specified one. So that will allow it to load the user customized ones first, and then in our instance, so we load the user customized ones first, and then the dashboard node gets added to the palette or loaded into the palette. It sets its default. We don't want that default to override the user provided one. Make sense? Makes sense, I think. So we're going to say if not on down, because this is not a user provided one, and action to keymap has own property, so it's not, we've been called with a non-user keyboard shortcut. We already have a keyboard shortcut and it is already a user one. If that is all true, then I think we return, because we don't want to take any more action, because the rest of the code following through here deals with setting up the handler. Now, could this have unintended side effects? So what I'm thinking is, what am I thinking? No, because we're not overwriting anything. We're gracefully bombing out. Let's have a look. I'm just trying to think of any unintended scenarios where we muck around with user shortcuts that could get broken by this. But with a bit of luck, if I scroll down to show dashboard, it's recognized it's a user one with Command-Shift-A. That's good. And you'll note I added this code after we would have added it as the default. So I should at this point be able to click on it and hit revert, and it goes back to Command-Shift-D. And if I set it to unassigned, let's go just check what it looks like in the file. If I set it to unassigned, you can see here, unassigned means it has an entry with the user true but without key or scope set. So it's set to unassigned. Let's reload. And that shouldn't matter because the user has said I want it to be unassigned. So keyboard shortcut dialog, go find show dashboard. Show dashboard has gone back. It has not picked up that unassigned setting. Okay. So we've not quite fixed it all yet. We have fixed reverting back to the dashboard's default value. As in, if you customize it and then click revert, it will go back to the right default value. We've fixed if the user has their own non-null, non-undefined setting, it gets reloaded. So the scenario we've not yet fixed is if the user clears it. And yeah, because why is that? So the logic we've just added, essentially this check here, is because someone has called add handler and it's a system one, or it's one coming from code where it's not explicitly set as being a user, coming from a user, and we already have an action for it, and that action is a user provided one. What happens when the user provided one is null or undefined? Let's go back up to our, if I can find it. So here's where we load the user keymap. Here is where we load the user key map. And okay, so here is where we load the user key map. What I've paused, there's one thing I want to go and just see what the behavior is. We've been focused on dashboard because the dashboard nodes get loaded after all the keyboard stuff gets set up. What I'm curious by is, and based on the code I've just seen without necessarily talking through it line by line, is let's go, and I'm just trying to think what's going to be one of the earliest keyboard shortcuts registered through code. Let's do copy selection. And if I set that to unassigned, okay, so it knows that's user. If I close, and then let's just go check the user file just to check. Yep. So you can see core copy selection to a clipboard is there without a key or scope, as in it is undefined. Now if I reload the editor, and then curiously, it still knows its copy selection to internal clipboard is unassigned, although it doesn't recognize it's a user provided one. If I hit that and hit revert, it does revert. Oh, okay, so we are at 8:45, we're teetering on the edge of a rabbit hole of other scenarios that don't quite necessarily behave as they should. So I'm at the risk of trying to keep it focused. Let's focus on what is our scenario. It's if the user key map is undefined. If you recall, when I showed you what the user key map looks like in the config file, for the ones that are null, and of course there are no null ones there. Let's just set ourselves up with a null one. Right, so it only has the user property. It doesn't have key and scope. That's important. We will, and oh, now this is interesting. This time, cancel edit tray, it has recognized it's a user one. I wonder if that's because cancel edit tray happens even earlier in the life cycle. So yeah, there's definitely a sequencing issue going on here. But anyway, and I'm going to revert that. Oh, and it's not letting me revert. Oh no, have we broken something? No, because revert ought to revert regardless. We haven't changed Okay. I think we've just stepped one big foot into a rabbit hole. Try my best to stay out of it for the moment, but I think there's going to be more to fix than I'm going to get done in the next 10 minutes. But let's try and get the logic right. Yeah, absolutely. We are fixing one bug and uncovering just as many to take its place. Sometimes it's better not to fix bugs because, if you fix a bug, the chances you introduce a dozen more. Plus, it's keyboard. Who cares about keyboard handler? And no, it's important. It's these little things that just you expect to work, and they should work. Right. So for the user key map, in here you can see when we're loading the user settings, we are saying if it has a key, then add the handler for that key. And I've shown you in the file, when it's set to undefined, that doesn't ever get set. what we need to do is have an else statement here, and we are going to say else, because at this point what do we want to do? We're not calling add handler because what I'm thinking is we need some way for the system to know the user has turned it off. They've set it to undefined. Now we need some way to know the user has turned things off. That's what we're going to do. So just as we added this check that we don't want, so if it's not on down, I'm going to, just for the ease of talking through the logic, I'm going to nest this if statement a few times just to show the different clauses more explicitly. So not on down, and like I said, terrible variable name, but that means this is not a user set value. This is a system set, and at the moment we are saying don't override if there's already a user set one. But there's another clause here. There is another clause we want to care about here. And that is, it's either that or the current editor settings keymap, and this is where right. So we're about to get a little messy. What we're going to do is going to add a new function in here. Get user key for a given scope. Do we want it for a given scope? Do we need it for a given scope? I think we do. How is it keyed? No, get the user key for an action. Sorry, that's what it should be. And then this just makes it easy because there's lots of scenarios when none of this could be set. So we've just got to guard against all of that. I think that's going to work. Get user key for an action, and that will give us it back. So then down here, that if statement I was starting to build. So it's either, oh, don't do that. Get user key for the action, and the action for crazy reasons is cv down. Now, is this the right thing to do at all? At the moment, we're saying, oh, it's a bit of a mess, but don't override if there's already an action set and it's a user action. In fact, we don't need, if we're also going to look at the user's key map, we don't need to do both checks because one is a superset of the other. Yeah, all we need to do is reduce it down to that, I think. So if don't override if the user already has an action. Is it that? It seems likely. Right. Where are we at? So show dashboard, it has the user action and it hasn't been overwritten, so that's still working. I can reverting it goes back to unassigned. So that's not working now. One hand giveth, the other taketh away. So why is that not working? Oh, now that's interesting. I reverted it again and it's gone to the right place. Oh, I'm confused now. Right, let's reload. Keyboard shortcuts. Show dashboard. Okay, it's on the default. Set it to A. That works. Revert it. Okay, it's not reverting back to the right thing. I thought we'd just fix that. If I hit revert again, it does revert back to the right thing. Okay, something to investigate there. Let's set it to unassigned. Okay, recognizes it's the default. Let's close it. Let's reload it. Bring up the dialog again. Search for it a bit faster. And lo and behold, it has recognized it's unassigned, which it should be. Not showing it as a user one. That's something to resolve. Hit revert, not done it. If I hit revert again, it has done it. Okay, we're edging closer to figuring this out. Good, right. What's going wrong though? Let's look at revert to default, because our reverting isn't quite working. And let's stick some console.logs in here. And for those following for the first time, yes, I'm a console.log type debugger than a DevTools type debugger. Just, I don't know, just how I've always done it. So we just want to see what all this is. And actually, yeah, I fully acknowledge this would be so much easier potentially doing in DevTools and actually step debugger. But not right now. So just instrumenting it just so we can see the different code paths it goes down. And see what it gets each step. And see if we can make sense of what's going on when I hit that revert button and it's reverting back to unassigned, not reverting back to what it should. Keyboard shortcuts, dashboard. So let's set that to Control-Shift-A. Let's just, right. Let's clear that so we've got some space. Are we ready for this? Hit revert. So, sure enough, it is set the shortcut to unassigned. Revert to default. So the current action is a user one, and then the default is Control-Shift-D. But you can see it has not successfully set that shortcut. So what is it doing? It does remove handler. It does do a remove handler. Just bear with me, I'm sort of thinking through. Okay, it does the remove handler, which removes what's actually bound to that keyboard shortcut, and then it calls add handler. And add handler, and you can see from our debug, we've got the right default to revert to Control-Shift-D. Problem is, because of the change we've just made down here in add handler, I bet it's bailing out here. Let's just see that in action. So bailing out exactly, it's bailing out at exactly the point we want it to bail out in one scenario, but we don't want it to bail out in this scenario. So if we set shortcut Control-Shift-A and then revert it. Oh no, it's not bailed. unless I just reloaded too quickly and it hadn't. Okay. Oh, I don't know. This is going to need a bit more debugging, but this is where I wanted to go, just have a look to see exactly what it does. So the revert button, so this is the actual code when I click revert. It gets the current shortcut for that button, for that action, sorry. It gets the current user key map. Oh, interesting. We've got a bit of duplication here. Yeah. And that's just a bug, so that shouldn't be there, I don't think. But here you can see it nulls out from the user key map. Right, I'm just going to do an experiment based on the logic we've just added. I'm going to let it update the settings first and then tell it to revert the actual shortcut in the keyboard subsystem. Hope this is interesting, guys. This is sort of, for what on the face of it seemed a relatively easy thing just to get the logic sorted out. You end up so many different scenarios to deal with. So there we've customized it. Now we revert it, and it's not reverted back. It's reverted. Oh, it's reverted. Oh, what is going on? Okay, if you didn't see that, so I customized it, and it sees it's custom. I revert it once, and it doesn't revert it. I revert it a second time, and it does revert it. What changes? Why? It's these sorts of bugs that, well, you can sometimes enjoy, because nothing I've seen now can quite explain why it takes 2 calls to revert in order for it to successfully revert. Yeah, so we're up to the hour. I'm gonna just plow on for a few more minutes, because sometimes with these the penny will drop and it just becomes so much more interesting and figure it out. Equally, I've known bugs like this that have taken days of not continual, but just had to come back to it every now and then. But why would reverting to the default at this point in time take 2 attempts to do it? And I wonder if it's to do with, let's go find revert to default again, because that's where we added all that debug. Now there is one if branch. No, because in both scenarios you can see current action is set in both the first time I click it and the second time. The one difference is that first time the current action is a user, and the second time it's not. Now that's curious. Okay, so just look what you see. If I set it, okay, if I hit revert, you can see current action says Control-Shift-A user true. And then it's setting it back to the default of Control-Shift-D user false. However, the row still shows Control-Shift-A and it's a user one. If I revert again, here you can say the current action is Control-Shift-D user false, but which is what we'd set it to. Now, is that because I just did something really silly? No. So it's this build shortcut row is the thing that refreshes the table. Is there something going wrong in there? Let's scan through build shortcut row. So what are we actually passing in to build shortcut row? Obj. That's what we're passing in. Is right. We're getting there. We are getting there. What is this, a cosmetic thing? So I'm going to print out, where are we? I'm going to print out the object that we're passing into build shortcut row, which is responsible for refreshing the UI. I've completely lost track of the original issue. I've no idea where we stand with that, but we'll circle back on that in a minute. Go and have a look. Show dashboard. Right. Set it Control-Shift-A. Okay. Now, let's just clear the console. I hit revert. And sure enough, I've hit revert and it's come back. It's setting it to user true Control-Shift-A, which is wrong. It should be setting it to Control-Shift-D user false. And is that because I've moved revert to default down? Did I remove? Shortcut. Yeah. I think once we do the revert, we go and get it again. Actually, do we use shortcut? No. So in fact, we should go and get the shortcut after we've done the revert. So that was the problem. We were getting the shortcut that we will rebuild the row on before we'd done the revert. So it was always going to be sort of historically one behind. Keyboard shortcuts, dashboard, Control-Shift-A, okay, correctly shows as a user one, hit revert, and brilliant. Okay, so that's now reverting properly. Good. We set it to unassigned. Okay, close that, reopen it. Okay, so it's showing as a user one set to unassigned. Hit revert, and it reverts properly back to the system one. Didn't mean to close that. Now if we set it to unassigned, close so it saves, reload the editor. I think we've done it, guys. That's a very confident statement. Oh, okay. Not showing as a user one, but if I hit revert now, it reverts it. That's worked. If I set that to unassigned and it's showing as a user one, and if I just reopen the dialog, it correctly shows it as a user one. But if I reload the page, it doesn't show as a user one. So, okay, it's 5 past. I'm going to hunt down why I think this is the only remaining issue, and it's a purely cosmetic one. Why is that not showing as a user? Why is it, if it's unassigned, is it not showing as a user one? I think this, if we can crack this, then we are done. And it's very simple. The build shortcut row that gets called, if it's got the user property, then that controls whether we show the user or not. Very simple. So why is build shortcut row why is the object that's being passed to that in the first instance not got the user property set? And that's because it's calling red actions.list, which gives you a list of everything, which is the action and its current keyboard shortcut. Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay, so this is, I seem to remember this is a little hacky, but where's list? So list actions, yeah. So it's calling list actions, which iterates over all the actions and it gets the current shortcut. And then what does it do? It sets it to shortcut.user, but I bet there's no... Right, so in this, we are there. Well, let's just check what dashboard, show dashboard. That returns undefined. So it returns undefined because there's no keyboard shortcut, but that doesn't tell this bit of code that there's no keyboard shortcut because the user has explicitly said there shouldn't be. All right, now this is slightly trickier because we're now in a different module. We're in the actions module rather than the keyboard module. So strictly speaking, we can't just look up but for the sake of it, well, yeah, it really doesn't matter. If we add that function we added, get user key, if we expose that, so on the API of keyboard we have get shortcut and get user shortcut. We can use that. Let's just format this better so we can format it a bit better. So is user let's assume false, then if shortcut is user equals shortcut.user, else if a regular shortcut's not been found, we can say is user is shortcut. So is there a user shortcut for this at all? And then I think that's right. So I'm using the double exclamation mark because get user shortcut will return the full object if it exists, and we just want a Boolean one whether it exists or not. So double exclamation mark will coerce, if it's an object, this will coerce it to a true value. If it's undefined, we'll get false. I think that's going to do it. Right, we're only 10 minutes past. I've run longer before, so I'm not. And I'm show dashboard unassigned, and it's correctly identified it's a user one. If I Control Shift K, it doesn't matter. Control Shift K. That's worked. Let's reload. Control Shift K and it shows us dashboard, and I revert. It goes back to Control Shift D. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've fixed all the scenarios we wanted to fix. Let's just have a look at one other, for example. Copy group style, Control Shift C R for no good reason. Reload. Because I want to make sure it's working well for Control Shift R, user one, that's all worked. Revert, Control Shift C, that's good. This Control Shift C, let's unassign it. Oops, unassigned. I'm going super speedy now, just doing these few tests of some of the other potential edge cases. What did I just do? Yeah, so copy selection to internal keyboard shows as a user one. Shows I can revert it. Good. There was cancel edit tray. That's the one I screwed up just now. Control escape. Control escape, that's good. Let's unassign it. Close, reload. And if this one all works, then we can take out the debug. Yep, cancel edit tray, user, still unassigned, and I can revert it. And we are working. So that's everything working. Okay, so I will fully acknowledge the downside with console.log debugging is I've now got to go through and make sure I remove them all. I think there is certainly some technical debt in this file. Let's not kid ourselves around the logic around some of the variable names, because it's got all this legacy handling of other stuff. Console.log, yeah, that's the other one I want to get rid of. So there's still one in there, but that is genuine console logging. Yeah, we're done. Right. So issue number 2753. Let's go find our code. So in actions, we I'm not going to talk it through. I've spent plenty of time talking through it all. We now probably acknowledge the user's preferences over system default values being assigned. Oh, what's just happened? Oh no, there we are. Those are our two files. I'm going to commit them. Fix user keyboard shortcuts. Not. Well, what have we actually done? Ensure user keyboard shortcuts override defaults. That'll do. Fixes. Anyone remember the number I said just now? 2753. Yeah. There we go. That's committed. And that's pushed to master. And that will be in the next maintenance release, which will be, well, I believe that's, let's just have a look at, yeah, so that is the only commit since we did the maintenance release. So we won't be rushing that out immediately. We'll do a maintenance release as and when a few more things have cropped up or something comes up that needs addressing straight away. So that's tonight's stream, really. Otherwise, what else is going on in the world? I've mentioned been doing a lot of migration work on the Flow library. This comes down to the web host it's on gets turned off in exactly 1 month's time, unexpectedly. So I've been slowly updating the code for the Flow library to make it easier to run somewhere else. At the moment, just the way it was cobbled together all those years ago, it stores, when it adds a node to the library, it stores the node locally, and because nodes have custom icons, so it stores all the icons on the local file system, and in the database it has a path to on the local file system of where that node's icon is. And that's not very portable. If I want to move this app onto other cloud hosting that doesn't have persistent file system. So I've been going through and fixing stuff to, I'm just clicking through trying to find a good example. I think Tasmode would work if browser caching wasn't breaking it. Yeah, so here's an example. So what I've been doing is updating the code, so now all node icons get automatically uploaded to an Amazon S3 bucket. And spent a fun afternoon uploading 4,500 node icons, and then going back through and updating the database. So rather than pointing to a local file, it points the URL to the right place on S3, which is fun. But that's all working now. and that is actually now the last piece, because I migrated all I had a similar issue with the flows, that the actual JSON and the README we stored as files on disk, and we loaded, whenever you loaded this page, it would load those 2 files from disk and render them. Well, we now store those in the database that backs this whole system. So it's made the database a bit bigger, but that's, well, not proved to be any issue. And like I say, all the node icons are now on S3, which is good. So I think, touch wood, I can now think about where we're actually going to rehost the flow library, and then with a bit of DNS magic, it should move over fairly seamlessly. There is more work to do. There's a bunch of automated tasks that run on cron job that I need to convert to alternative systems to run regularly, whether they're sort of Lambda serverless functions running on a time interval, I don't know. But yeah, that's good fun. But unfortunately, because of the pressing deadline to get this stuff moved by December the 9th, that's kind of getting in the way of me doing much else Node-RED work-wise. But I want to get a development plan together for 1.3 in January, and also think about 2.0 in April next year. We know what the big features are, but they're not going to be shipped unless we actually make a start on them. So going to start putting together a development plan. In terms of this streaming, we'll see what comes up over the next few days. There's still a couple issues in the backlog which I can probably cover in here. I have had a couple of requests to do a bit more around testing and how we do test automation in Node-RED, both of nodes but also of the core. I think I've mentioned that in the past. We know our code coverage figures have dropped quite a lot, so we need to get those numbers up. So yeah, really, if there's anything else you're interested in seeing me walk through, I hope tonight was interesting. But if there are other areas, even if you're not sure what specifically you'd like me to cover, if there's just a part of the code base you're interested in, how does it work? How does it do what it does? Happy to spend this time sort of walking through, talking about it. It's always good to talk through and rationalize and remind myself how any of this stuff works. And then spot the interesting technical debt along the way, like the variable names in that file, which I will make a note of going to tidy up, because that certainly didn't help. Right, that's enough wittering. Definitely time for a cup of tea. So have a great week. Stay safe, wear a mask, stay indoors, whatever your local recommendations are. I'm certainly staying in the house for the next month. So there we are. C'est la vie. Thank you, everyone. If you're watching on YouTube, do subscribe. New videos up every week. Leave a comment. Let us know if you're enjoying it. Come say hi on Twitter, on Slack, on the forum. Goodbye for now.